this has all the hallmarks of a really well planned out career.
No, it is the
right?
opposite. How do you take these mathematical frameworks and apply it to real world problems is pretty much all of what data scientists do. One of the expectations was you should go be like your uncle. My uncle, chief technologist at NASA. So I kept making these decisions which I liked, but also not really thinking through, is this the only likable thing that exists for me? But if you chose a master's that is more job oriented, your courses are completely different. LinkedIn is a phenomenal tool to connect with people. If you're earnest and ask the right questions, people will help you out.
It's okay to be vulnerable, but do it in a manner which is professional. The situation that you are in, literally almost everyone has been in the same situation. I've cast a wide net and reach out to as many people as you can.
Welcome, folks. This is the Career Show from FinTent. We all remember having that dreadful conversation during or just after high school that went like, have you thought about what you want to do next, or have you picked a career for yourself? Or sometimes maybe it went, I want you to become a cardiac surgeon like your uncle who earns a lot of money in the US. Or you should go to an IIT or an IIM like our neighbor's daughter and then find a job at one of these big tech companies, Apple, Google, Facebook, or Amazon. Most of you also remember being puzzled, confused, clueless, and just plain angry and frustrated at not having any idea how to pick a career or how to go about picking a career. Or if you're just like us, you probably picked a career only to find out you're not cut out for it and that your passion lies somewhere else. Careers by FinTent is an honest conversation to convey that it's okay to feel all of the above. This is a show that tries to bring to you real stories of working professionals, folks who've charted out a successful career path for themselves. It's a story of their struggles, their challenges, their usual or unusual paths, and their turning points. But most importantly, this is a show about the human journey that lies at their core. So without further ado, let's talk about today's guest. But before that, I realized we hear certain terms every day. Things like machine learning, data analytics, big data, and data mining. I'm not sure if we can get by even a day without hearing these. So I started thinking, what do they mean? Why are they important? Why are they so omnipresent today? What's their potential? How do you prepare for a career in these fields? Do they have all a common skill set that can be applied across all these fields? Well, that's what you're here to talk about today. Our friend Ranga has been working in the data science field for almost a decade across several companies and cities. So let's hear it from him.
So on behalf of your hosts, Arvind and Karthik, a very warm welcome to the Career Show by FinTent. Today we have with us our friend Ranga. So we're going to talk in detail about his journey and what he does now. So hi Ranga, how are you?
Hello folks, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Ranga, so you are a data scientist at this company called Grainger, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Can you tell us a little more about what exactly is your job title and what do you do?
My job title is Senior Manager Data Science. It doesn't give you a lot to work with. What I specifically do is work with enterprise data. So my company collects a lot of data about how our customers purchase from us, how their purchase patterns, what kind of work they do. Essentially, we aggregate all that data and help the company make better strategic decisions.
Okay, so I'll just give a brief gist about this company, Grainger. Right? So it's an MRO company, which is a maintenance, repair, and operations company, where you can basically buy from a small nut to a huge motor, right? That stuff that industries need to get their job done or to fix things. That's to put it very simply. So
yeah, I think the easiest way to put it is to say it's Amazon for businesses, right? So if you're a mechanic, you're a car mechanic, and you're looking for like an AC part from 1995, and you don't have, you can't find that part, you go to Grainger and order it.
Very specific. Correct? That's correct. Yeah, it's very specific parts and components that are needed to run businesses.
Yeah, so this is like one of those Porsche ads, if you guys remember, where the guy comes in with a very old tractor and walks out with a Porsche 911. If you've seen that, where they fix his carburetor and then they put it in a museum.
What ads did you watch growing up?
Well, I watched Formula One, so
I watched Bajaj ads.
Bajaj.
Bajaj.
Okay, so let's get back to what. So you take enterprise data and you make patterns out of it. Can you go into a little bit detail? Simplify what you actually do.
Of course.
And for crying out loud, and sorry not to interrupt, for crying out loud, like tell us something that like a 10-year-old can understand, because as we all know, when most people talk about their jobs, it's the most boring thing on the planet. So,
Yeah, I had a suspicion that CV had an IQ of a 10-year-old, but now it's confirmed. Simply put, so every company has operations, meaning things that they do for their customers, the way in which they deliver product to their customers. And since CV brought up Amazon, let's take Amazon's analogy and shift it to the business, right? So when you guys have buying patterns on Amazon, you shop a certain way, you look for certain things, you buy from certain channels, you have specific preferences of how you want things to be delivered to you. So all of the data is available to Amazon to use to make your customer experience better. So the same thing transfers over to the business domain. So if you have a hospital, if you have a welding shop, if you have a metalworking shop, all of these people have certain products they need. They have certain buying preferences. So sometimes they'll buy only from a designated seller. Sometimes they'll buy online. Sometimes they will go to a branch or a distribution center and buy stuff. So all of this data is collected and stored in, something called a data lake. Let's not get into that now. But all of this data is aggregated over a period of time, and we use that data to help the business serve the customer better. A more relatable example is when, let's say, you're a salesperson. Like Grainger has hired you to go talk to a customer, figure out what their operations are. Hey, let's say Karthik, you run a metalworking shop, right? And you cut metals. You need abrasives. You need metals to be polished. So you have a certain number of things that you do. Or let's say you're a hospital. You have to buy PPE. You have to procure them. You have to store them. You have to distribute them within your hospital. So you have a certain operational structure, right? A seller would come in, try to understand you, try to have a good picture of your business, estimate how much money you can spend with us. All of those things are available to him, right? Now, what I come in with is based on other hospitals that I've seen. That seller has only access to those hospitals. I have access to hospitals in Grainger, Canada, the US, Mexico, China, India, all of those places, right? I have some aggregated knowledge of how hospitals function. When I say Grainger has collected data on how hospitals function. My job is to build them insight generation mechanisms so that they can go sell better to that hospital saying, hey, look, I know this is how you function, but this could also be very useful to you. So if they're buying just PPE from us, what we also want to sell to them is janitorial supplies, because hospitals go through tons and tons of janitorial supplies. So it's simple insertion of data at an aggregate level into a customer's life or customer's product lifecycle or their operations lifecycle, so that one, we can fulfill their needs better. Two, we can have better customer retention, and they know that we are a pretty broad seller of these products.
Okay. So it's information. You're basically using information to price your products better, to understand what else customers want, to give them better products based on what they're searching for.
Yep.
Price products and also discover products.
Yeah,
discovery
exactly.
as well. Discovery is a huge component, because you can't, if you're going to compete in this space, we actually compete with Amazon. Amazon Business exists as a competitor to us. There are other companies as well. So if you're going to compete in the space, it's extremely fragmented. You need to be able to grow your business. You need to be able to grow your market share, and the way you do that is upsell and cross-sell.
Sounds like you like it, given the passion with which you're explaining things. So just elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, it's essentially a long runway for doing data-related products, right? So there's so much to do to help the business to be better, to perform better. Sellers are just one component. Supply chain procurement, meaning buying products from China or whichever country that you source from, is another component. Pricing is another component. So there's so many different business problems to solve that it always keeps you on the edge. You keep learning stuff. You learn more about the business every day. So there's a lot of interesting stuff to do.
It's basically like drinking through a fire hose.
To some extent, yeah.
Yes, and you're interfacing with different parts of the business, different processes in the business. So you get a bird's eye view of all of those processes, and hence you learn a lot every day.
Exactly, and that's one of the primary reasons I got into the business.
So that's what you love about it.
Yeah.
So what drives you crazy, I guess, in this job? Obviously, if you like it, something has to drive you crazy also.
data science job itself, like the nitty gritty of the job is very tedious. So there's a lot of romanticism involved with the profession because the thing that is projected to college student is, hey, look at you built this model that's going to net you an incremental revenue through the sales channel of like $100 million. But what really happens in reality is you're like working on that problem day and night for like ages. So before a problem actually takes shape into a modeled solution, you have to sort of do so much of underlying due diligence, nitty-gritty, putting together data sources, understanding the business problem, talking to like 7 different stakeholders. It's a very tedious job. There are non-scalable components in the job that people don't realize when they are outside the profession. There are a lot of parts where you just wake up one morning and be like, I can't do this anymore. It's very tedious and it's very boring.
Can we unpack this a little bit? I feel like there are developers who code and they love coding, right? They love figuring out the logical, the algorithms and the logic behind it. And then data science is basically bringing operations and code together. So it feels like you have to like talk to a bunch of people, get them on board. So it's a lot of persuasion, a lot of negotiation, etc. And as a management consultant, I can tell you that that is actually like it's one of the more fun pieces of the job, but it's also a pain in the neck.
It is,
right? Because you're dealing with people, and especially like people in technology are not always equipped with those skill sets, and they also don't know how to tell a story well.
Yeah. So being in a company like Grainger, which is some sort of, I wouldn't say a legacy company. It's not a technology company, right? It's a company that it primarily works with, like, I would say, blue collar customers, meaning their adoption of technology is a bit behind white collar adoption.
So we'll come back to skill sets that you need in a little bit. We'll go into detail about that. But kind of switching gears, right? Tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, where do you come from? What did you study? Where did you work before? Is this your first job?
Yeah. So like you guys know, I went to school with you. I grew up in Chennai. I went to a couple of schools in Chennai, NPS and DAV. So yeah, I went to NPS and DAV, and I was, by the end of the 2 years of high school, I was so exhausted that I gave up on all of these standardized exams. So I basically went to Shastra. Ended up Shastra. I had a phenomenal experience there. I studied electrical engineering, after which I came to the US to do my master's in electrical engineering to continue my undergraduate education, between which I worked for a year in TCS with Arvind Ramachandran. I followed up my master's degree with entry into a PhD program, which didn't go very well, and I took the parachute out and landed a job in a startup.
Okay, so let me get this straight. You studied electrical engineering in undergrad, and then grad. Yes. You went to do a PhD in electrical engineering. And now you are in machine learning in an MRO in the Amazon for businesses.
Yes.
This has all the hallmarks of a really well planned out career.
No, it is the opposite. It has the hallmarks of somebody who doesn't know what the heck they're doing.
So that's right? I'm sure there was some method to the madness. What did you do? What
no.
Did you do? I mean, I can also understand that you ran away to do your grad school program because you were tired of Arvind at TCS. That could be one of the major reasons. But help us look in a little more deeper. Right? Why did you make these decisions? Like, it looks disparate from the outside.
Yeah.
Walk us through it.
I'd say me coming to the US was sort of, I wouldn't say forced upon me, but I think my parents expected me from, even when I was younger, one of the expectations was you should go be like your uncle. My uncle is a chief technologist at NASA. So there was this very high bar within the family that I always kept getting compared with. It was a little bit of a stressful experience because most of my family members expected me to like do very well in my career, and that definitely played a part in actually leaving India. So when I took my job at TCS after undergrad, I was extremely mentally exhausted. I took it so that I could get away from my dad and essentially tell him that I need a break. Essentially, I needed time to figure out what I wanted to do. That a year or year and a half really helped me clear my mind, I would say.
So let me get this straight. And I had a similar experience.
Yeah.
So I went to do a lot of CFD work and then realized, I'm not sure whether you realized at that time or not. Working for NASA is not easy for an international student unless they did something really, really specific and important for them. Did you realize it at that time that these are too big a pair of shoes to fill? You need to chart your own path, or did you just go with the flow, right?
I did not. I mean, to be honest, when the people around you are like giving you, showing you, exemplary people and telling you that, hey, look at this, you can do this too. What they don't tell you is this part where there are a lot of things that need to fall in place for that to work out. I discovered all of that after I came to the US, and it was a little bit of very anxious 2 years, I would say, doing my master's. And going into the PhD program was also one of those things where I didn't really think it through. It was not a very well thought out decision.
But this is the fundamental problem that most Indians face, right? Which is
It is.
there's usually someone in the family who's like, who's got like some semblance of, above average success, and then that person becomes a template for everyone else to follow.
Look,
The
I'll stop you right there, right? Like, I don't mean to say that my family forced me into like sciences, right? When I was in my 10th standard, my dad sat me down and he asked me like, what do you want to do, right? And he gave me a lot of time to think about it. And when my dad's in commerce, right, he's a CA. He told me, hey, look, if you go into commerce, I will help you out. I know everything about the industry. I'll get you a job, do everything that is needed for you to set you up in life. But if you want to do something else, that's totally fine. So you choose, right? My parents were very, very patient and nice about, selecting a career, but they were very, very driven themselves. So they drove their kids really hard, and they kept rushing us a little bit, both me and my sister. I kept making these decisions which I liked, but also not really thinking through, is this the only likable thing that exists for me?
The theme I get from this is, okay, they were helping you make decisions, right? But there was not enough of a framework for you to make an informed decision, or a support system for you to make an informed decision. And do you think that's what's lacking with people or families who send their kids to the US?
It's not just sending the kids to the US, right? Like, it's also families who send their kids to the other side of the country to go do engineering. It's also, families pressuring their kids to take up an IT job when they don't
Yeah.
need to. So I think you nailed it, Karthik. The lack of framework is the problem. So why should you do a master's? Why should you go into IT? Why should you not go into IT? I don't think there is a framework to evaluate these questions. And I think that's very badly needed. And I worked it out in real time while I was going through making all of these decisions. But it could have very well gone wrong, and it did go wrong a little bit in between.
What do you mean it went wrong?
So I got into my PhD program. I was knee deep in stuff I did not understand. Meaning, so I came to the US to sort of continue my core specialization in electrical engineering, which was control systems and signal processing. I love those subjects. Very math heavy. Also, I could sort of tell what was the application, but what I didn't know was that there were absolutely no jobs for Indians coming in and doing that, because most of those signal processing jobs are in, companies that work heavily with the US government, and you need security clearance essentially. What I didn't know was that my uncle, who worked for NASA, came to the US before an H-1B program existed, before any of the complexities that exist for Indian students today. So it was a very different path he took. And my parents didn't know about it. All of the people in India, like, pointing to him and saying, like, look, you should be like him. They knew none of the details, right? Always ask very specific questions when somebody says you should do this. I should have done it. I didn't do it because as a kid, my brain was still forming. I was being rushed, and I felt a little anxious all the time. And I would say, take a moment to breathe. It's okay to sort of evaluate your choices, even when we are really deep into it. And the problem was, I got into a PhD and I had no business being there. I sat in this lab with students who had horsepowers order of magnitude greater than me, who had a deep love for mathematics, who had a deep love for sciences, which I did not have, to be honest. Not enough to do a PhD.
Okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah. Okay.
So
It's like
Ranga's
7
story is
years of
very
that stuff.
similar to
Yeah.
mine, right? I mean, it wasn't something that he didn't realize he couldn't deal with. And so walk us through how you made the decision to switch from a PhD program at a pretty good university and then go into a job. How did you, what gave you the courage to make that decision?
Can I
I
set some context for this for a second?
yeah, please do.
I don't think a lot of people realize this, but if you apply for, so one, getting into a PhD program in the United States without a master's program, it's really, really hard, right? Let's preface that by saying that a lot of people try to do it, not a lot of people get in. I think I know two people who've done that. One is Ranga, and the other is my wife, right? The second is people in the universities actually pay you to do your PhD program. So as opposed to you doing a master's where you have to pay the university, thousands of dollars,
That's
the
right.
university actually pays you a monthly stipend. So you're technically working, right? Even though you're studying. So you get like a monthly stipend of like $2,000 or so, which is you can live a very comfortable life if you are not married and if you don't have kids and if you're single and if you're straight out of 23, 24,
Yeah.
right? So there is already an investment by the government and the United States in you, right? So there is I guess what I'm trying to say is that there is a lot of expectations already, right? You have your advisor who is basically
Breathing
taking
down your
money
neck.
out of his own lab's pocket and is like investing in you. You have the university who is also funding your tuition, right? And then in the midst of all this, if you choose to quit midway, I'm sure there are repercussions to that. Sorry,
There is
carry on.
there are repercussions. I mean, to be very exact, right? So you get a $10,000 stipend for a semester. So like it depends on the geography. You get like around 10 to $15,000 per semester. So you get like 30K per year. And if you're a student, that is jackpot. $30,000 to go study somewhere is a lot of money, and especially if so the way MS PhD works is you do something the first semester, like your advisor will guide you, try to push you towards a job that you can take, a grader or something like that, right? And then in the second year is when you really have cleared your core courses that are required to sort of do the basic level of research. So you get introduced into a lab, you'll work with a senior PhD student or like who's like further along into the program. So in my first year, my dad paid for my tuition. Like the first semester, my dad paid for my tuition. I took these courses that were like super core, super mathematical, and I could feel it. I could feel like the heat. Like, oh my god, this is hard. Like, and I'm expected to sort of take this and like apply it and come up with a paper. I'm like reading this paper and I don't understand anything. Like, what have I got myself into? And you're right. There's so much pressure. Your advisor is asking you, like, how's it going? Like, have you thought about papers? Like, have you thought about like picking out niche areas? I'm like, dude, I couldn't do the last assignment. What are you talking about? And
So, so let me just clarify before going on. So you got into an MS program, but transitioned into a PhD, or was it two different degrees that you were trying to pursue?
so I got admitted into an MS PhD program, right? Which is
Okay.
essentially they will sort of pay you for the second year of your master's and slowly transition you into a lab that your advisor runs. And like my CV was saying, that advisor has a pool of money he's dedicating towards finishing off your master's, right?
Hmm.
So he is already starting to expect things from you. And at the end of first year, while I'm getting ready to go into a lab, I'm realizing I don't want to do this. And
Hmm.
How did that conversation go?
they've already paid a little bit of money, and I wussed out. And so what I was doing was something really stupid in hindsight, which is going and talking to my advisor, trying to figure out this Venn diagram of I'm already planning my exit at this point, right? I'm talking to my advisor. I'm like asking him like very probing questions about like what kind of jobs does exist in the industry for this kind of stuff, and he's like telling me about it, and then I'm realizing most of these jobs are in the U.S. government related sectors. And then I'm talking to like a senior of mine, Amar, saved me with the right amount of advice. He's telling me like, dude, I was in the same position a year ago. Like, you're not going to get a job with these courses. And these are like highly theoretical computer science and electrical engineering courses, right? These are theoretical concepts that are required to go do your PhD where you learn the application of it. But if you chose a master's that is more job oriented, Your courses are completely different. The core courses that you cover are only 2 or 3. But in your first year, I've taken like 6 courses that are pure core electrical engineering, which are not going to help me get a job. And it was basically like, sky crashing down on my head. And
So
a
the
lot
kids
of
out there, right, who want to go to grad school in the US, you better really know what you're doing or have
yeah.
a support framework that will help you. That's the common theme that comes out of Ranga's and my story.
And
You
around
really have to
this,
know.
yeah, and around this is like, guilt for like wasting your parents' money, right?
I mean, you were getting paid though.
Not in my first year.
Okay.
So
Okay,
so they're getting ready to pay me, and they're asking me, "Are you okay with this niche area? Are you okay with this niche area?" I'm like, "Dude, I barely passed the courses my first year," and they're like keeping on track of my grades, not getting A's and the top grades. Is he gonna be able to cut it? Like all of this is just like flowing into you at the end of the first year. It was a pretty harrowing time.
so kind of switching gears a little bit, right? Talked about your academic journey. Let's go back to your job right now. I mean, looks like you had a very tumultuous path to where you are right now.
Yeah.
And talking about your job, kind of requires some crazy skills. Looks like putting all sorts of conversing and liaising with all sorts of different teams that have different sorts of experiences and backgrounds. So talk us through some of the skills that this field, machine learning, in such an organization. What are the 3 skills, top skills that you need in a field like this?
Look, I won't go into the soft skills because that's a different section altogether, and that I think that's common for a lot of other professions as well. For students who are listening, the fundamentals of electrical engineering really helped me. So linear systems, right? Essentially matrix multiplication and stuff like that. Mathematical methods to solve different calculus problems to solve, like mathematics required to solve unbounded problems. So any calculus and differential equation related math is what the underlying core of machine learning is. So machine learning is essentially you set an objective, and under the constraints of a particular problem, how do you get the right parameters to solve a particular problem? So again, going to Greek and Latin. All engineering programs in India cover these basics, and that's pretty much it. And if you know it, it's a question of like taking this underlying problem solving capability and applying it to business problems.
So looks like just numerical analytical math.
Numerical optimization methods, right? Like you take it in the first year. And
all of this stuff is going over Arvind's head at this point.
Yeah, Arvind is not from the technical domain, so it's understandable. So
Karthik, I am an engineer. I am an engineer. I have an engineering degree.
On paper. You see from your expression.
You were like, we're losing you there, dude.
Listen, can I just say something? The stuff that you guys call linear optimization or like math is what I do on Excel on a daily basis. It's Solver, all right? For everyone out there, Excel has this plugin called Solver, which you can learn in 30 minutes. It's not that crazy. There's an entire industry of universities selling courses based on this stuff. It's Solver.
Apart from any other courses, anything outside that you've had to acquire? Anything outside the courses that you had to pick up, on the job or stuff like that?
Yeah, so I mean, I've picked up most of the things that I do every day. Have been things that I've picked up on the job, to be honest. So apart from programming and doing basic math, everything else you pick up on the job. And one of the core things would be, how do I apply concepts to real world problems? So for example, let's take the problem of pricing, right? So you need to know what is the price you need to apply at for a particular product, so that 1, you make enough money, 2, you are not outpricing your customers, meaning you are not pricing it too high, and you're also competing with your competitors. To do this problem, it's a constraint optimization problem. Learning how to do this is what you will do every day, meaning how do you take these mathematical frameworks and apply it to real world problems is pretty much all of what data scientists do every day.
But you said you quit your PhD program in the first year. Did you have a chance to pick up all of these skills and walk us through, some of the aspects of quitting the PhD program and whether you picked up these skills before you did?
Yeah, I did. While having a massive freak out and like insecurity issues, I started like talking to people in the industry. So I started networking with people who had jobs. So firstly, like, how did I choose machine learning? I I truly did it only because my thesis overlapped. So I was looking for like, what is the real time, like real world application, business application of things that I'm learning. So signal processing has numerical optimization, nonlinear optimization, picking objective functions, solving constrained and unconstrained problems. So these are like, you can look these up.
He's saying he learned a bunch of concepts or courses in his master's PhD, which have very broad applications from signal processing all the way up to machine learning. Because these are, if you break them down, they're mathematical problems with some constraints and boundaries. He picked up skills in courses which are applicable all the way from AI, machine learning to optimization.
Yeah. So IQ of a 10-year-old, like I said. So you have these problems that you have these foundational mathematical methods. Now I was like desperate and I was looking for what are the fields that are solving it. Signal processing was one, and all of those jobs were US government jobs. The other one was machine learning, but machine learning is an abstraction of those problems. It's a higher level application of those problems. So now how do I bridge that gap? Like, how do I go from all of this theory that I've learned to the practical skills that sort of bridge that gap between real world application and the theory? So that is programming. That is Python. That is SQL. That is that is all the things that you would learn in one of the many thousand data science programs you have today in schools. So those programs are teaching you this bridge. What they're not teaching you is this underlying theory, or what they're not teaching you is what is this mathematical foundation and how do you connect this to this, right? So when I started out, there was no standard machine learning programs in schools. There was no AI programs. So it was just computer science and electrical engineering. Now you go figure out how to put this together and apply it to the real world, right? Thankfully, I had not a mentor, but somebody who was in the industry who had gone through a similar experience to me 5 years before I did. And I very thankfully, thanks to God, I found this person in one of these networking events I went to. And I latched onto this guy. I asked him all the questions I needed to. And this was while I was planning my exit out of my PhD program. And this gave me some context of what I needed to do, what are the courses I needed to take or learn on my own to do that exit, right? So that I can actually create a resume, put it out and say, hey, not only do I have theory, now I have this bridge skills that I can use and be useful to the industry.
So here's one question, right, that brings all of this together. If you went back to school today, knowing what you knew, right, all the tumultuous times, what would you spend your time on? How would you reframe those 2 to 3 years of your life?
I would probably not worry too much about those 2 to 3 years, but I would probably spend 6 months of my life before going into a master's program doing in-depth research on the different paths that are available to you before you enter the program, right? So,
how would you do that?
So there's 2 different ways. One is talking to people who have gone through the program, graduated out, and are in industry. So you have to so for students, you can do this through LinkedIn. It's very simple, right? LinkedIn is a phenomenal tool to connect with people. If you're earnest and ask the right questions, people will help you out. I was totally vulnerable with this guy who I met in a meetup, right? So this guy was working at Pandora. And Pandora was doing well at that point. And if you're a student, Pandora Radio gave you they had a freemium product, right? So everybody knows Pandora. And I connected with Pandora. And I was like, what are you doing in Pandora? You did signal processing. You're like, oh, I write the underlying code for Pandora's music recognition system. It's like, wow, that's interesting. How do you do that? With the skills you have? He was like, I didn't have those skills when I graduated. I learned it on the side. I'm like, oh, you can do that? I'm like, yeah, of course you can do that. And then I told him, dude, I am in the same position. I am completely lost. I need your help. And I think that really connected with him because he saw in me somebody who he was 5 years ago. And, he just felt bad for me and tried to help me out.
So you're saying it's okay to be vulnerable as long as you tell your story?
100%, and be professional about it. Tell him this is where I want to go and I'm feeling a little anxious. So can you help me out? I'm just saying that you have to try different things. You have to be able to improvise. You have to be able to get a feel for what works with a certain person and what doesn't work. Right? I'm not saying I was trying to work this guy out. I was desperate at that point. and I felt I could share with this guy because he had a similar background to me. So I thought he would connect, and that probability was higher with him than somebody else, right?
I see. So I'm able to abstract a couple of things from this. One, it's okay to be vulnerable, but do it in a manner which is professional and not, getting too personal about it.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
number one, right? And number two is realize that the situation that you are in, literally almost everyone has been in the same situation,
That's it.
right? So you're not alone, right? So people
100%.
have gone through whatever this tumultuous time of job hunting, career hunting, etc. Everyone's been through that. And the third piece is, yeah, like you need to like have cast a wide net and reach out to as many people as you can. Some of them will respond, some of them may not, but at least even if one person responds out of every 10, that's all that you need, right? And so don't get disheartened just because a few people don't respond. A few
Yeah.
may. So let's focus on that.
And being on the other side now, if somebody reaches out to you with, sharing a piece of their vulnerability, right? Uh, I if time permits, you have to reach out back to them because you're just giving back in a way that
Right.
do your best, right? And the other thing is, if you're a school senior, right, or if you're a person who's just entered the industry after finishing a master's or PhD, I would say give actionable advice to kids who are reaching out because I had a lot of people tell me, "Hey, this is just a natural flow of things. It'll be fine." Like that doesn't help me. Like, what does that mean? Like, should I continue on this path? Like, everybody is looking out for prescriptive solutions, and you can lay out a couple of solutions for people, and they can take it or leave it. But be a little bit more prescriptive when you sort of see people reaching out to you.
So did this guy from Pandora help you land your first job, I guess, outside
He
of
did.
your MS PhD
He
program?
did.
Or walk us through your first job and how you ended up at Granger.
So it was in this company called Simple Energy in Boulder, Colorado. I landed a job as a data science intern in their product organization. They were building products for utilities to manage their customers. So if you have,
Were you getting paid for it?
yeah, I was getting paid for it. I was getting paid like
Okay.
$24 an hour or something like that. So Amit is his name. He was working at Pandora at that point. I had met him at a Hadoop meetup or something like that. And 3 months later, after like telling him a little bit about what I was doing at that point in that meetup, I reached out to him 3 months or 4 months after that meetup, and he immediately responded and he said like, "Hey, yes, I used to work at Simple Energy." He had worked at Simple Energy, and that was one of the primary reasons I had reached out to him. He remembered me because I was the only student for some reason in that group of like in that meetup, which had all working people. So another tip: go to these things. If you're the only person, don't feel awkward because that will make you stand out. People will remember you. So I had gone to this Hadoop meetup, which I didn't understand anything that was going on in that meetup. The only thing I got out of it was a job, right? So it's like any standard meetup you find on meetup.com, tech meetup, right? You have like an organizer or a organizer who is inviting like an expert in the industry to come talk about how this technology is applied in the industry. So I was going there so that I could like get familiar with the terms that's used in the industry. So I was like going there for the jargon, right? I'm an introvert. I don't like networking. I'm really bad at it. I'm really awkward when I have to speak to new people. And the only reason I met Amit was I was in the food line standing behind him. And, he was an Indian, right? Like he was an Indian. He was like, we started chit chatting and whatever. And he was like, what are you, you're a student. What are you doing here? Like, he was curious as to why I was there. And that's how it started.
Is it a free food line?
It was a free food line. Yes. 100%. Like
I don't know how that
meetups.
goes, grad students.
So yeah, I met Amit there. Like 3 months later, I reached out to him. He put me in touch with Kevin, who was an engineering manager at Simple Energy, and that was my first job, right? For my first interview after I came to the US. Amit helped me. Actually, he even coached me a little bit for the interview. Very nice of him to do that.
That's smart. That's nice.
Yeah, like owe my career to him. So he coached me a little bit as to this is what they do, this is their core competency, these are the things that this company is looking for, right? And went to the interview, spoke to a product manager, spoke to an engineering manager. They felt the best place to start would be as a data science intern in the product organization.
And in short, can you tell us how you ended up at Granger from Simple Energy?
I took a path. I mean, I converted into a full-time role at Simple. So I went from a data science intern to a junior data scientist. And at the end of 10 months at Simple, I was let go. And I had basically.
Why were you let go?
The company was going through a cash crunch. I was not doing a good job. It was a combination of a lot of different things, I would like to think. And I was very lost at Simple. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what to do, how to execute. I didn't know how to work. I just didn't know how to work in this country. I didn't know, data science was new to me, right? Like I know only the theory. I'm like trying to figure out this middle layer. It all came together at the end of 10 months. I was let go. So I found a job in Chicago in this company called Orbitz. It's an online travel agency. So it's like Kayak, Make My Trip,
Expedia.
yeah, Make My Trip, and all of the different online aggregators for travel, right? I worked at Orbitz for a year. Expedia bought them out. It was an acquisition, and I worked at Expedia for a couple of months in Seattle, and I felt like I could do better. So at the same time, I was applying for other jobs, and Grainger was one of them. Again, found my job through LinkedIn and networking with a recruiter, and called me in for an interview. Did 3 rounds of interviews, and landed a position as a senior data scientist.
Okay, so let's just go back to that overarching theme, right? What are the things that you would have done better or avoided, some of the pitfalls that you'd avoided? One thing that you were going on was the 6 months sit down and research what are the fields that are available, what opportunities are available. Can you let's go and pull on that thread a little bit. What more pitfalls would you avoid? What would you do and we wouldn't do?
If you decide to do something, let's say you decide to go to TCS, right? Or if you decide to go work in digital marketing, anything that you decide, right? Spend at least 2 months before the decision talking to at least 2 to 3 people, asking them very specific questions about what does a day in their life look like or day in their job look like. Try to relate that back to, is this something that I'd like to do? This is something that I would enjoy doing. Those 2 things are really important. And if it's a master's program that you're entering or a PhD program that you're entering, there are going to be so many people who went ahead of you doing that. So you should talk to those people and figure out whether that's the right thing for you to do. And that's for people like me, right? There are other people like friends in college who knew exactly what they wanted to do. They knew that they wanted to do signal processing. They knew that they were going to do a PhD program, get hired as a faculty, and do great things. If you're that sort of a person, this advice doesn't apply to you.
So one of the biggest assets that I see is that you developed or possessed is you basically went through a course load which had a wide variety of applications. These 3-4 courses that you took, right from machine learning to design optimization to a lot of different issues. So just from your work, I can find out you worked for a travel company, you worked for I don't know, you work for an MRO company right now, and an energy company, which are widely different fields. But it looks like your asset is great. Your great asset is probably the fact that you had a bunch of courses or a skill set that could be applied in any of these fields. Is that true? Do you want to add something to that?
That's a phenomenal insight. I think so. I sort of ended up on this one end of the spectrum, right? Like the how you craft your master's degree or the courses that you take is essentially a spectrum. So you can take all theoretical courses or you can take all practical courses that's just completely programming or something like that, right? But I think this applies for MBAs, this applies for PhD. I mean, maybe not for PhDs, but this applies for all kinds of masters, which is the theoretical foundation that is required to exist long-term in the industry. Add that with some practical skills that will help you apply the theory. I did mostly the theoretical foundations. I was lucky enough that somebody told me that you're not going to get a job. You better figure this shit out soon. So I started like scrambling and learning that application aspect of things. So when you're going into a master's program, both of those are necessary. You need to strike a balance. If you go too much in the practical sense, in a sense, learn only the application of certain technologies, you will be outdated very, very soon, because the application layer or the applied theoretical foundations, right, are going to keep changing. The way they apply the foundations will keep changing. The programming languages will keep changing. The modules, the functionalities will keep changing. The problem statement will keep changing. But what will not change is the theoretical foundation. So get that in your first year or first 6 months. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid that it's hard. It's supposed to be hard. And then build a layer of application on top of it. And I think like doing the theoretical foundation has helped me a lot. But if I had to go back, I would tweak my masters a little bit by doing a bit more application courses also, because I had to do that on my own with Coursera and stuff like that on the side, and it was stressful.
So the underlying theme is have a good balance between theory and application-based courses for whatever your respective industry is.
100%, yeah.
But before that, really know what kind of jobs exist out there and what is needed for that theoretically and application-based.
Yeah, and try to connect the courses that you want to take with applications in the industry. That's going to help you learn that application layer. What are the courses that I need to learn that application layer? By asking that question, you will know what to take.
So how does someone do that?
Internet's your best friend, to be honest. Reddit, great resource. College seniors who are working in the industry, being vulnerable to people who have been in your position. I don't have one specific answer. You have to be resourceful. There is a shortcut, which is you go through the program that you plan to go through with a cohort. I didn't go through a program with a cohort. I was alone. I had to figure my shit out. My wife, on the other hand, came to the US to the same university with 4 of her undergrad friends going through the same course structure. So you have assignment partners, you have course partners, you have study partners, you have job application partners, you have interview preparation partners. You can breeze through your master's program with that.
Right. So hunt in packs, right?
Hunt in packs.
I think it's a common theme.
But if you're interested in an area where there are not a lot of students, then it will be a little bit more difficult. But I'm telling you, it's not. If you do the preparation, if you talk to the people, if you're reaching out, it is not that difficult.
So we've spoken a lot about the career, the masters, the education, etc. Is all of this worth it, like financially? Like, so how much would starting salary for someone like a starting data scientist, how much would they make?
Data science is a pretty broad term. I would say I'll speak.
Okay, how much did you make?
I don't want to get into. So okay,
$500,000.
Okay, I'll be very specific. So my starting job was $49,000 at Simple.
Okay.
But that was 10 years ago, right? It was 9 years ago, 2012, 2013.
Okay.
Today, if you have the right kind of theoretical base and if you have the right application level skills, you will start anywhere between $80,000 to $100,000.
Okay. That seems like a lot.
And what does 7 years of experience do to that number?
So if you're somebody who can connect business problems to technology problems and execute well, you will make a lot more money. In Google, you get paid $500,000. In Google, you get $700,000 or sometimes even $1 million if you're really good and if you're in the top 5% of in the field. Across the industry, you can make anywhere between $200,000 to $300,000.
Okay.
So there's an interesting point here. Right? If you are a technologist, but you can still convert business problems, have that aptitude to look at business problems and convert them into technological problems and help find a solution for them, there's a lot more recognition to be had in companies in the machine learning industry. I think, right?
100%.
If I can put it right.
We're scratching the surface with respect to what you can do with machine learning and AI and data analytics in all sorts of domains. So you might hear people saying, some might say, hey, the ML wave is past it. It's past the hype peak. I would say it's just about hitting maturity. There is a little bit of growth to be had in the application sense. The theoretical max, I think, has been had, but there's so many different areas where you can apply machine learning, and you need that thinking product hat on to do that. And if you can do that and merge it with your theoretical foundations, there's money to be made.
So that flows beautifully into what I wanted to talk about next, right? How do you keep yourself updated about these different applications for what you do? Right?
It's exhausting.
Do you have to update your skill set, or do you have to read up a lot or go to training courses? What sorts of updates do you have to go through, for to keep your skill set, hone your skill set, basically?
You can do all of those things. So it really depends on your job. So I work in a more of an application plus build technology kind of a role. I don't honestly get a lot of time to do that. It's a big challenge and I'm trying to deal with it. Trying to manage my time better to do it. So you can go to
But
conferences.
I mean, sorry to interrupt, but the one thing I will say is that I've been to his house, right? And he's probably the only guy I know who has like scores and scores of technical books on his bookshelf, right? And I know these are after he started his job and he's been reading them. You have been reading like technical books also. You have been like keeping yourself up to date with that.
Not
It's
not so
something that
much
I've
in the
not seen a
past.
lot of people do.
Not so much in the past 2 years, but yes, you have to do
Okay.
some aspect of it. And I think Medium is a great resource to do it because you have so much content published on Medium in the technical domain. Airbnb engineering blog, Walmart engineering blog, and Facebook engineering blog. These like companies put out so much content. They publish so much content these days, and they are all open source. Uber's engineering blog as well.
That's awesome.
Amazing content. If you're a student, start reading today because you will immediately know how to connect theory to practice. And not only do they put out text and content relating to how they've created these solutions, they actually release their code. You can actually check out their code from Bitbucket or GitHub and build modules on top of what those companies have done. It's really useful.
From the outset, it looks like a very mentally challenging job. I mean, what do you do to kind of keep yourself like stimulated mentally, physically, intellectually?
Stimulation. Watch movies.
I love to read. Right, Stevie?
I love to read. I love to read nonfiction stuff I love to read about politics. Like I like to play cricket, although I don't do it often enough.
Thanks so much. This was a great interview.